Welcome to Straight Talk. A new season for the meat industry is just around the corner. What shape is it in? Silver Fern Farms is closing its Brooks frozen lamb cutting operation in the UK with 64 jobs to go as it slashes debt. And there are concerns here at home from farmer suppliers about the disparity in payments made depending on whether they're in the North or South Islands. And is Tally's move to buy up AFCO's shares really all about gaining control of open country dairies rather than the meat processor? Plus, what's happening with the newly renamed Beef and Lamb Roadshow? Today I'm joined by meat industry commentator Allan Barber and former Federated Farmers President and former Trade Ambassador Brian Chamberlin. Now, Allan, things really as bad as this headline in the Herald seems to be making out?
Things aren't quite as good as you'd like them to be in the sheep and beef industry at the moment. It's sheep meat that's the real problem, and as Brian and I were talking about earlier, it's the fact that wool isn't pulling its weight any longer. Wool, really, you can just recover your costs possibly, whereas it used to represent a third of the proceeds from the animal. So meat, really, and the byproducts has to carry the whole load. And
so farmers have higher expectations of their meat companies to deliver them those extra returns this
yes.
coming season?
Well, they've had those higher expectations ever since the wool price took a dive. They've expected the meat companies to come up with the price that they need, regardless of the exchange rate, regardless of how good the overseas market prices are. I think they're somewhat unrealistic, but on the other hand, they have to run their business, and that article is saying that sheep and beef are going to be replaced by sheep and beef farms are going to be replaced by dairying and other forms of land use.
What do you think, Brian? Is the end nigh, as seems to be being suggested?
Well, I agree with Allan that it's a sheep problem. I don't really think it's a beef problem because with the expansion of the dairy industry, of course, there's a fair bit of beef involved in that. So I think Allan is also right in suggesting that the poor wool prices are one of the factors. But the industry is under pressure from three angles, as I see it. One is with the ETS. You're going to have the forestry pressure on one side, probably continued pressure from the dairy industry on the other side, although the sales of dairy farms have really slowed down, and there's not quite as much confidence around as there was. And I think one thing we don't take into consideration, especially in the north here, is urban sprawl. Because if you go back some years, for instance, we had 3 major processing plants in Auckland. We had a lot of sheep in the district, from Glenmurray to Wellsford, and they've nearly all gone. So the industry is smaller than it used to be. But wool, I think, the poor wool prices are a big problem because lamb, sure, we're not getting as much as most farmers would like, but it's largely kept pace with inflation, the lamb price, even with the increase in the New Zealand currency.
Allan, wouldn't meat companies say that their configuration is pretty matching with where stock supply is coming from at the moment?
Yeah, in general, but I think there's a view that in the deep south there is more plant capacity than there really needs to be. Alliance, of course, is of the view that they have the most efficient plant capacity down in that part of the world. Silver Fern Farms keeps talking about right-sizing, but Alliance, I think, would have the view that Silver Fern Farms still need to do rationalisation, which is one of the big stumbling blocks for the mega merger.
Right. Now, with Silver Fern Farms' announcement regarding Brooks in the UK, has this decision been a long time coming to exit from that offshore processing side of things?
Well, I think it was really somewhat out of date. It was historically a very useful capacity or useful production facility for them, but in the days of frozen lamb. But now frozen lamb cutting really is a thing of the past, and so much of the lamb cutting can now be done in New Zealand. A lot of it is ship chilled, so there's progressively less need for a frozen lamb cutting operation.
Did they hold on to it longer than they necessarily should have, or was it just a bit slow to make the decision, perhaps?
Possibly. I I don't have a strong view on that, but it didn't surprise me that they'd made the decision when it arrived.
No. And what about the suggestions, Brian, that there's a disparity between prices that North Island and South Island farmers are receiving? This is nothing new, is it?
No, it's not. It's not new, and I suppose at this time of the year, it's at its height, if you like, because of the big local market here in the north, and you're going to have that change. It hasn't always been the case, but I think that it's market forces at work largely.
What do you think, Allan?
Well, I certainly know that stock, as usual, finds its way from the South Island to the North Island. There's constant sort of truckloads of lambs in particular heading north to bolster the production in the north. And this year in particular, you've had the far north, which hasn't got any stock left. So the companies like Auckland Meat Processors, for instance, are now having to truck animals from the South Island to the North Island up to Auckland, purely and simply so that they can fill the plant. And I'd have to say that one thing that I did find out from Auckland Meat Processors was that actually the condition of the animals and the damage to hides was actually less from the animals they brought up from the south than the ones that they traditionally got in the north.
Well, that's very interesting, isn't it, Brian?
Well, colder in the south, so perhaps they've got thicker hides.
Yes, must be something like that.
Could be, yeah. Now, staying in the North Allan, the Tallies move to buy more AFCO shares. How's that going? What sort of feeling is out there amongst farmer shareholders?
Looking at the paper, there's not much. There aren't many shares shifting, and I think those that are going to sell at 37 cents have probably made their decision and pulled out. So I'm not quite sure where Tallies have got to. I don't think they've got up over the 90% threshold for compulsory acquisition. But I don't think it matters to Tallies, to be honest. I think they've got 76. They had 76.1 before this started, and I think that they're quite happy with that.
Yes, it's just cream on the top, the extra shares.
Shares have been at 37 cents for a long, long time, haven't they?
You'd be a AFCO shareholder, would you, Brian, or you would have been?
I used to be, yes.
Yes, yeah. And I remember when the shares were much lower than 37 cents at one stage of things, weren't they? Do you think Tallies has really added value to the company by coming in with a broader perspective, not just being meat industry focused?
Well, I think one of the reasons that some people have got out is that they're not paying dividends, and so for retired farmers need something to live on. So that'd be the major reason they've sold their shares. But then you've got investors like Hugh Green who aren't selling their shares and see, or he's announced that he's not, see the longer picture. And I think that they say the asset backing of the shares is about 70 cents.
Yes.
So that'd be the sort of thing that the Hugh Greens are looking at. Because they want to increase their wealth, if you like, whereas most of the retiring farmers who had shares needed income. But I doubt if they will get to the 90%.
No, I doubt whether they will. I think enough will hang on.
Now, moving on to the new look beef and lamb. Mike Pedersen is out there selling the message to over 100 gatherings of farmers. What sort of reception do you think he's going to get, Brian?
Well, it's a big job, and I don't envy him. If you look at the number of people who voted in that last referendum, and the more or less negative vote, it's a huge job he's got, and quite frankly, I just can't understand farmers who have a couple of $1 million tied up in smallish sort of sheep and beef property, why they just don't get more involved off the farm and see what this new group is trying to do for them.
There seems to be a concerted move, Allan, to move right back to the farmer, to get to that sort of coalface and really deliver to them things that they want that will improve profitability on their properties. Do you think that's going to work?
Well, I think it's got a better chance of working because the way that beef and lamb are spending the money can be much more closely identified with the farmer. And that's, of course, what farmers get upset about, is seeing their money being invested in things that they think has, overheads and structures that they think has nothing to do with them. But the one message that farmers need to get from wherever, whether it's meat companies or from beef and lamb, is that if they don't make a commitment to contract their livestock supply, the being on the brink of extinction, as claimed by federated farmers, is going to become a reality. But it's not the meat companies that have the obligation to make farmers do that. Farmers have got to work together with meat companies to make it happen. And until that day comes, they're going to be struggling.
Thanks for your insights. Coming up after the break, what's up with the Pork Industry Board? Is it really stonewalling an audit of pig farmers' operations under the Official Information Act? Stay with us. Now it's on to You Said It, comment in the ag media, which we want to talk about further. Well, Allan, there's been some suggestion about former business relationships that former Prime Minister Jenny Shipley has had with Jack Chen, one of the big players in natural dairies, looking to buy the Crayford farms. What sort of difference does this make? Is it embarrassing?
Well, I think Jenny Shipley is well known to have had, or to still have, very close relationships with China, very strong contacts in China, and she's done a lot to promote New Zealand's position in trade with China, so I think it was probably inevitable that she would have had connections to somebody like Jack Chen. I also have seen photographs of him shaking hands with John Key, and also taking part in some sort of gathering together with Phil Goff, so I don't think it's restricted to the National Party.
He spreads himself around.
He spreads himself around,
What
yes.
do you think, Brian?
Well, it's 11 years since Jenny Shipley was Prime Minister, so I don't really think that it comes into the politics at all at the moment.
No. And what about the whole natural dairies bid? It seems now that Landcorp isn't in the play at all. Natural dairies feel they may have a better chance. What do you make of it?
I've got no real idea of what's going on. It's very interesting that the Prime Minister has more or less stepped in and expressed concern that we shouldn't be selling our land, so I just don't know where it's all going to end.
What do you think, Allan?
Well, I don't think Landcorp was ever in it, actually. They made a great noise, or the media made a great noise about the fact that Landcorp was putting together a bid for it, but I don't think Landcorp was ever in the running to buy it. And I'm pretty sure from what I understand that the receivers have other options up their sleeve if the natural dairy bid is turned down by the OIO. I think that still has to be judged on its merits according to the law as it stands at the moment, and if the quality of the bid is good, if the quality of the individuals behind the bid is above board, then there shouldn't be a problem. We may not like it, but it's the way the law is at the moment. But it should have nothing to do with anything really, other than the quality of the individuals, the directors, the credibility, and their ability to fund it. But I don't think Landcorp was ever going to stand a chance because they knew that their price was going to be under. They were going to be
another idea that probably doesn't stand a chance, the Greens' suggestion that the land could be bought and it would make a wonderful addition to the Puriora National Park. That's not really a flyer, is it, Brian?
Well, it's some mighty good farms, and I don't think people would be wanting to turn these mighty good farms into parks.
No. No,
the question is who's going to pay the money to keep on preserving parts of New Zealand's landscape which has already been developed for agriculture and then turn it back into conservation land. It's not going to happen.
I think it's one of the